Welcome to Power Up Your Practice, the go-to podcast for law firm owners and managing attorneys working on the business, not in it. I'm Ruby Powers, your guide into the heart of law practice management, bringing your insights from leading legal minds, trailblazing attorneys, and expert guests who provide practical perspectives on running your firm more effectively and efficiently. And before we dive in, I'm thrilled to announce that my latest book, Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with actionable advice for growing a successful law firm. Be sure to grab your copy today. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and resources. And if you're enjoying this podcast, we love your reviews. They help us reach more attorneys like you who are striving to build the practice of their dreams. Prepare to open your mind, be inspired, and power up your practice to the next level. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to have our guest today, Michelle Griffin. She is here as the CEO and founder of Griffin Resources, which provides fractional human resources support to small to mid-sized domestic and multinational companies regarding general HR needs, payroll support, employee development, process, compliance, benefits administration. I'm getting tired just thinking about this, and talent acquisition and recruiting. That's so true. All the stuff that we have to do as law firm owners, and when do we do it ourselves, and when do we hire for help? Anyway, Michelle, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Griffin Resources?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. So I started the firm about 5.5 years ago. And so I pretty much stopped doing client-facing work after year 2 and started growing and building the company after that. So now I am lucky enough to have a hierarchy. So I manage a couple of the department heads and run mostly growth and sales strategies for the company as well, and kind of work into different areas and opportunities that can present itself for the company. So just last year, we did an acquisition of a company that was primarily in healthcare, which before that, we only had about 2 clients in healthcare. And this kind of opened the doors. Now we have about 15 clients that are in healthcare. And the company that we acquired did the same kind of recruiting structure that we did, but they also did sales ops and growth strategies for those types of companies and industries for home healthcare. So that also kind of expanded into some of those other ops and digital marketing and some other back-end growth support that we didn't have before. So we started expanding into different areas of need for small to mid-sized businesses beyond our original expertise of HR, payroll, and recruiting. So that's why the list just goes on and on now about the type of operational support that we can provide to companies.
Well, so I mean, what are some of the themes you see when businesses need your help? Or because I mean, this is a lot of the exhausting things that we do in a business, the running payroll, like hiring, finding people, all of that. So, like, what are some of the trends that you see and the need for the services that you provide, whether it's for you or your company or some other one? But I think some of us are like, yeah, that's not my favorite place. I'd love to hire somebody, but when do I have the funds to do that? But anyway, what are some of the trends that you see?
Yeah, so it depends on the size of the company. Some of our smallest client is literally 2 people, and the largest is 500. So we play different pieces of that role for different size companies. And it also depends on their budget. So we try to stay really flexible with our clients' needs and try to realistically perform what we can for the budget that they have. And like some of our clients literally maybe only spend $500 or $600 a month just for payroll and maybe HR on call, while other companies can spend $3,000 or $4,000 a month for a recruiting person and kind of some additional HR support or onboarding that they might need. And we can do it project based, or we can do it completely at their side for years. It just depends on what they want. So some of the trends that we tend to see is people start a business out of passion and out of what they know and want to do, especially professionals in like attorneys and doctors and things of that nature. And then they get to a point where they realize running a business is really hard, especially if you get to a point where you want to hire people. COVID did a couple of good and bad things for businesses where they thought, well, if people can work remote, I can hire them in any state. I can hire the best person and it doesn't matter where they live. And then they realized hiring someone in another state opens up a whole new issue for taxes, employment taxes. It can open up nexus for sales and use tax if they're actually providing some kind of good or service that is taxable. So those are some of the things where if they start to really having to deal with different types of employment law in different states, and they have a really hard time managing that and knowing how to manage and discipline under each one of those different regulations. So we tend to help with that. Also, once companies get to about usually it's 8 to 10 people and they need to grow above and beyond that, they start having to hire people they don't know. And they'll need to do traditional hiring practices. And they have to start competing with bigger businesses for the top talent or for good talent that they're looking for. And they may not have the budget or the resources to offer benefits or certain types of needs that other bigger companies are going to be offering those talent. So we tend to work with companies with strategies on what can they do to stand out, what can make them a good place to work at their size, how can they attract the talent for the size of the company that they are versus where they need to be. And so things of that nature is where it's not only having to hire the right person, but the right person for your own culture and kind of keeping it in kind of like in a space that you want to be in, and then also kind of keep your future goals in mind. So it comes down to very specific types of hiring for that kind of need. And it's not just talking to an agency and saying, well, I need to go hire a person. They go away, they come back with candidates that you kind of pick out. We look more like a corporate recruiter. So we tend to physically get an internal email address, brand, and and go out and look like the front-facing person of that corporation. And then we help them bring in talent specifically for them under their brand. So it's really interesting that some companies want to be able to afford that because it's a gamble. They have to pay us for our time versus, only paying if they hire somebody that an agency decides to bring them. And it's so we try to, it's way more affordable to do it with us, but it only works out if you're willing to pay for the time. And what we do is a partnership with the company versus thinking of it as just hiring a person. And so we see companies end up in a space where if they get too big and they absolutely need talent, and then they end up in warm body syndrome where they just hire anybody because they need the work done. And then they're not finding the right person. And that's also bad because then you end up with turnover. It's more expensive. So it just depends on the space and where they want to be and how they want to grow. And so we see different things happening at different times.
I have lots of questions, but first of all, I never heard that is a term, the warm body syndrome, but I've used it, but I didn't know that was the term that we could use. So that's yes, I think a lot of law firm owners do that. And it is dangerous because then you like lower your standards and then you introduce them to your ecosystem and then you're like regretting it. But I want to go back to something you said about after about 8 or 10 people. You said that you have to sort of hire people you don't know or outside or potentially. I noticed that when my firm, I think statistically they say one person can manage around 6 to 8 people. I'm wondering if there's something about that number somewhere in that 8 to 10. But what is it what you meant by what? I want to dive into that a little bit more, but like why you have to hire outside or people you don't know, or like why is that significant?
It just happens to be that size that people who they have known to be either people they've worked with in the past, other family members, they tend to hire people they know. And a lot of times that, people might come and go, they'll still see turnover when it comes to that. And so about the time that they're stable and they've got the core people that they know and they continue to grow, it becomes right around that size that they realize they have to use some kind of recruiting method to hire people, and versus just asking people they know to come work with them or help them build the company. And depending on how many original business owners there were, I mean, you just eventually start to kind of outgrow your own network. And, whether it be just kind of starting to ask around, asking people in your own network, do you know anybody that does X, Y, and Z kind of thing? Eventually you kind of just start, you've already done all of that at that point. And then you start having to need to just do
Yeah. I mean,
traditional
that's
recruiting methods.
sort of like the nice and easy way, like, "Oh, you have a sister? Oh, you have a friend? You like,
Yeah.
let's keep it all in the family," or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's like, "I'll give you a bonus for finding somebody," like, yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it. Yeah, I think my very, very first hire, she and I were both laid off, in the 2009 Great Recession time, and I was like, "Oh, I liked working with you. You know a lot of stuff. What, you want to be my first hire?" But
Yeah.
I mean, it worked out well for the time it was. I also, when we were getting start prepared, I asked you something about like, oh, so what are trends in hiring? And my thought is that there's a lot of like hiring shortage or labor shortage, but what do you say to that?
That it's while there can be a labor shortage, it does depend on the industry.
Okay.
Like certain industries have certain labor shortages, like construction, for example, has a labor shortage. Actually, CPAs have a labor shortage because people just aren't going into one. There for construction, there's just not a lot of glamour in the jobs, so people weren't really seeking out that as a job opportunity. For CPA firms, people stop going to accounting for school or going to school for accounting or for bookkeeping and learning the trade. So there's when we are asked to hire and we start seeing companies that need to recruit or build up their certain specific areas of the company, we sometimes we have to get very creative. For even truck drivers, there was a shortage there. So there's certain types of things where there's HR necessarily isn't one of those things where there's a job shortage. There's a lot of people that just don't need HR or think that they need HR. And so a lot of times when companies are needing to do layoffs or, there's an economic downturn, this industry that we're in for HR and payroll and things like that tend to see a cut from that perspective. I know a lot of people in HR that had to do layoffs and lay themselves off, and then have to figure out, how to start up new jobs from there. But from what we do is provide kind of a way to bring in a solution to businesses, do it on a part-time basis or even a fraction because it's so fractional. They may only need 5 hours a week, which isn't even a job. Um, and for us, what we do is, we'll end up assigning 3 or 4 companies or 5 or 6 companies to a person, and that kind of ends up making up the job for them. And so we end up getting to bring really small fractional solutions to companies in a way that they couldn't have otherwise. And that way companies can still afford to have, an HR professional or payroll or recruiting without having to have a whole person there or, have complete outsourcing. And so we'll see different companies needing to hire like different areas of their, whether it be, so even for law firms, for example, they may need just an office manager or, whatever their back office staff might look like. And so we've been able to, kind of supply that if they needed it. So different, that's why we can kind of work across many, many different industries because most of the time it's very similar in what the needs are when it comes to running the business.
And so when you started your company, you were sort of using the idea of the fractional CFO or some of the other fractional C-suite type of mentality idea, and just how there is a need, but maybe a business might not need a full-time person in that role.
It took me years to figure this out, to be honest. It did not just show up me like, I have this great idea and it's going to work. So, what actually happened is I was getting my doctorate and I wanted to only be a consultant or independent contractor while I was getting my doctorate. And I was in my second year, so I was still in coursework. And I was working a corporate job at the time, and I worked out an exit strategy with that company where I had 90 days to exit. They gave me a bonus at the end of it, which was we called it a retention bonus, but basically it was if I stayed the 90-day notice, then I would get the retention bonus at the end, or it'd be prorated if I left early. And that way I could train my replacement. They let me come and go as I pleased. They knew I was wanting to get clients. They really supported that idea, and I could have meetings. I started, going to networking meetings and things like that. And even the owner of that business took me to chamber meetings and started helping me network and things like that too. So it was a really great kind of mentorship as I transitioned. And so I had my first client by the time I left. So it was like September 30th was my last day with that company, and October 1st was the first day with my first client. And I basically went to, and I was talking to that business owner. He had about 12 employees. And I told him what I had done for HR, what I knew about HR. And I thought I was kind of going to give advice and help and consult. And he goes, well, why don't I just give you an email address and you go do HR? And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can do that. It's what I know how to do anyway. And so we started off with kind of a retainer model where I think it prepaid for 20 hours a month. And then if I worked over, I would just charge for the next month for what I had worked over. And then we would kind of keep prepaying for these 20-hour blocks and kind of this retainer model. My second client did something similar. There was a flat monthly retainer for us. There wasn't a really specific amount of hours. They just said it would come and go. So if it was under 1 month and over the next, they would still pay it and try not to take advantage of what was going on with the hours. So that one was really interesting. It was more like I was salaried, and they were like, well, we'll just give you the salary instead of paying our salaried person, and you can kind of get the job done. And so I didn't really have a payment model or structure. And then after only being in business for 4 months, I had 8 clients.
Oh,
And I didn't really have a payment structure and model. A lot of it was retained, a lot of it was prepaid. And that really helped me with my cash flow. It took me about a year and a half to get to a point where that just was not scalable. And so that's when I ended up transitioning to an hourly model where we use a system called Clockify. And it lets you round in 6-minute increments or 15, and it has different, or not rounding at all. So we round in 6-minute increments, and we can basically clock all our time with this different projects, and different project codes can have different billable rates. And then we turn in our timesheets with the invoices at the end of the month. And so I basically had to have enough cash flow to not bill for a month, work the hours, and then bill at the end of the month to get into post billing. And that's been the model ever since. So it really got to a point where it was what was easy to do, what was scalable. And so I started looking into what do other businesses do. And that's when I started looking at law firms and kind of seeing that they bill kind of hourly, and then turn in an invoice with kind of a product report and things like that. So that's how I ended up kind of stealing the idea of law firms and billing on this fractional space and kind of charging by the fraction of the hour, and then kind of turning in same kind of thing. We have to kind of descriptions about what work was done during the billable hours and things like that.
got it. Well, and then we're in this space too. I mean, that was very innovative. A lot of what we talk about is about the death of the billable hour, and trying to build out more in like flat fee space. But it's still, sometimes it can be difficult when it's very unpredictable what the amount of time that it will take to do whatever the job, or the scope of the job. But no, but that's really creative. And so I want to ask you some questions about turnover, because I think that's one of the biggest issues that is when business owners have to do their own like hiring and firing and dealing with the culture. Like, what are some of the best practices, or should a business owner consider looking at if they're experiencing high turnover?
So there's a few things that can contribute to turnover, whether it be the hire wasn't a fit. So there's a whole theory on the whole right person, right seat kind of concept, and different ways to try to assess that. And you can, from the initial onset, you can create an assessment that has a job match to it. We tend to use predictive index just because it's fast, it's easy, and it's accurate from a validity perspective. And setting up the job matches is pretty easy. So it's one where you can define what type of work is required for it. And when someone takes the behavioral match, they kind of align and see if it's something that's a fit for them, and if it's part of their natural disposition. So if they aren't naturally deposed, of doing that type of work, they're going to be outside of their comfort zone. Eventually, it's going to be too stressful and they're going to leave. And there's not much you can do about that. So having a right person in the right seat from the beginning is going to be important. also a culture fit is important, which you did mention, but defining your culture or understanding what it is about your culture that is meaningful to the person that you're hiring. So we actually experienced a lot of turnover, and I think it was in 2023 or 2022, somewhere in that range. Pretty much like everybody we hired left. And we had to really start to find out what is it that we offer that is meaningful for people. And so we started talking to all of our team members, especially ones that had been with us for a long time, and obviously doing exit interviews and figuring out why people were leaving and if people would be willing to be pretty honest with us, which we were lucky a lot of people were. And we learned that what was unique about our environment is the fact that we are all remote, and you have to
Mm.
be a self-starter. You have to be willing and wanting to do the work. And there's no one looking over your shoulder to make sure you're going to show up to work and things like that. We also started using our leadership coach. So we have a leadership coach, obviously, for our clients that tend to help build up managers and C-suites. And we actually asked her to work internally with all levels of everyone in the company. And that way she can also help define individuals' space and role, and as it contributes to the whole company, especially the larger we got. Certain milestones in companies, what it takes to get there, it's not going to take to get to the next step. So like the 500,000 to a million to 3 million, 3 million to 5 million. Those types of revenue milestone markers is going to change your culture. It's going to shift how people interact, how many people get to know each other, how many people you have in the company. And then the original business owner and maybe the original few people that were in the company that were the culture, they have to set the tone and keep it going. So if you have a toxic manager or you have someone that doesn't know how to lead, things like that can start to impact your culture negatively. And so if you start to see turnover in one specific area under one specific person, that's
Mm.
definitely something to look at. But if you have to lay someone off because of something that they did wrong, usually you can also look internally about what created an environment that they couldn't thrive in, and be able to say, is there something we could have done differently that caused them to, need to be laid off? Like, did we not support them right? Did they not have the right resources? Was it a not, it wasn't a fit. They weren't the right person. So things that you can learn from and grow and change about, your company.
Um, you said something about the exit interview, and whenever I've tried to do that, it's been a while, but usually people just I find they're not very honest because they don't want to burn their bridges. And it's a small community, like it's a small industry. Like, like for example, in immigration, even though the AILA has maybe 17 or 18,000 members, we might have 50,000. I don't know how many immigration attorneys, but like we pretty much are only like 2 degrees away from each other. So when someone's
Hmm.
with something on a resume, it doesn't take much to just call that office and say what happened. But anyway, but that's really great that you were able to get so much transparency. I'm just saying, like, because I think I
Yeah,
find
like even one of I had
yeah.
a payroll person leave, honestly, just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, because we've replaced her by now. So um, when she left, I asked her if she would be willing to kind of sit down and talk. And so um, when I asked her for honest feedback, she was really great. And she was definitely upset that she was leaving the company and quit. She was
Mm,
not happy at all. And what she explained was in our payroll area, she really wasn't given an opportunity to do a lot of work. And she was still training. There was still, like, we had so many different clients that we didn't have really good documented SOPs before coming in and training her. So a lot of it was training her in addition to developing the
mm,
SOPs. And so before we hired the next person, I was like, we have to have documented SOPs, we have to have a training schedule, and we have to know when they're going to be doing live work. The other thing is she thought that because she was a stay-at-home mom, she thought she could just do payroll, do the work, and leave, and kind of like have her own time and space to do her own life, and part-time work was going to be, very part-time. She could pick up her computer, do payroll for companies, and close her computer and not have to think about it. And it was much more interactive than that. She did have to meet with clients. She had to, there might be an implementation of a payroll, that someone might be changing their payroll system, changing a 401k system, and it took a lot more interaction than what she was initially wanting. And maybe she didn't ask the right questions, or we didn't give her the right information when she was onboarding. But that also taught us to be not necessarily more transparent, but to be more specific about explaining the job and what is needed and what could be expected. And so even when, and I didn't use like a interview template, although best practice is you should use some kind of questionnaire and template and document it and things like that. But, just kind of getting any kind of information about, we really want to learn and improve. What can you tell us? And not, so that's when it was something that worked out in my favor. But yeah, a lot of times, we've noticed even just giving people the space to talk and say, we really just want to improve, and not holding it against them.
Are you finding yourself overwhelmed with handling phone calls and spending endless hours on consultations that just don't qualify? Well, let me introduce you to Staffy Live, your ultimate solution for 24/7 live receptionist and intake services tailored specifically for law firms. Now picture this: empathetic, truly bilingual specialists who understand the intricacies of client care and are experts at asking all the right questions to qualifying callers efficiently. Now that with Staffy Live, you'll feel like you have a trusted partner by your side, ensuring only qualified consultations make it on your calendar and providing valuable follow-ups when needed. As someone who's been using Staffy Live for my own law firm, I couldn't be happier. And I guess what Staffy Live is now offering, a generous 15-day free trial with no strings attached. You can head over to staffy.cc. That's stafi.cc and click Get Started. And don't forget to use the code RUBY, RUBY. Your future self will thank you. What are some of the common misconceptions business owners have about HR, or common mistakes they make?
Common misconceptions, I think, is that they see HR as a necessary evil. And it in a lot of ways it is. They think they just, if they have to hire an HR person, they just know that they need one. They don't actually know what they do all day. And really it's very closely tied to employment law. At least a good HR person is. That's why there's certifications and continuing education and things like that. And as soon as laws change, HR practices change, and we have to stay up to date with employment law. And so we really go hand in hand with employment law. And so a lot of times companies if they don't see it as an investment, a lot of times we can't help them. They have to understand that HR and ops is an investment into your business and even into your people. And if you partner right with HR, then you'll be able to kind of set things up from the beginning and be able to say, I want my culture to be this way. I really want to have this kind of mission and vision, and I want people involved in that. And then we can kind of build and grow with that. And if you kind of just accidentally grow the business, eventually you'll hit some roadblocks that you can't get past because you weren't intentional about things. So some of the most intentional things, or unintentional things, I guess, we see people getting themselves stuck in is when they, most of the time it's when they don't follow employment law, which hopefully law firms are doing, but I guess it depends. But a lot of times, if they end up, just in some way breaking the law, or even just someone makes a complaint or they get sued even when they did everything right. And there's something that we will help them make sure they document everything, work with our partners at employment law firms and say, this is where we're going. This is what we've documented. Would they have a case and things like that? But a lot of times companies, they just, or even just didn't do I-9s properly. And we had one client that basically hired us to help them because they had already been, invaded by ICE and had about, I want to say it was like a $60,000-$70,000 fine for the I-9s alone.
Wow.
And so our job that we did was an HR audit. So we did a full scope audit, and including the I-9s, because one of the things that was part of their fine was to, make sure that they would have an independent review and not be making the same mistakes again. And so they actually had a payment plan. This was a couple of years into the fine that they had to do that. So, we've had several clients, not understand the documentation that's required. They don't know the risks or the fines behind things. And that's where we try to keep them out of trouble.
I think that when I started, like 16-ish years ago, I was afraid to hire because I felt like I was overwhelmed by all the rules, and I didn't want to screw it up. And then I started getting over it. Like I just learned the Texas Workforce Commission, and like I asked a ton of questions. I looked on the website. I talked to employment attorneys and stuff. And so like getting over that hump and just, not being afraid, but it can be time consuming, and I can see where people can make mistakes, especially if they're not good at it or don't hire the right people, or if they delegate too much to someone who they don't know how to oversee that they're doing the right thing and keeping things compliant. Because there's lots of little forms you're supposed to fill out for, anyway, a lot of different things. And so that's
different states have different rules, and you could be and that's where it gets really confusing for people too, because if they decide to go into other states either for a market reason or for an employment reason, for example, there could be states where if you have 15 people or 20 people, you have to do e-verify. And some of those states, it's only if you have that amount of employees in that state. Otherwise, some states, it doesn't matter. As soon as you have that many people, you have to be doing e-verify. Other states, you don't have to do e-verify, and it's just, either recommended or not required, or there's just nothing. You don't have to do anything. And as soon as you start doing e-verify, you're not supposed to stop. So it's one of those things where it's like you have to know the rules for all those little things, and you have to know it for every state for the ones that we help. We have clients that are in we've got we'll have clients that will have 15 people across 10 states. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Well, I completely get that. I once had an office in New Jersey. I'm mostly in Texas, and I got so used to sort of like the way things are in Texas that it was different. Like even they have state income tax, and a lot of the employment law is different. And I was just like, oh. And I had just one employee, and I was like, this is too much work for just one employee. But anyway.
Yeah. There's certain states where I'm like, please don't go there. California, Illinois, and New York are our top three pain points. And they're really bad when it comes to having very, very unique regulations, especially when they will have very specific city regulations that are different than the state. California is notorious for that, but Illinois is following suit with Chicago. So for example, in Chicago, there's required sick leave specifically for the city of Chicago. So if you have somebody within a specific zip code municipality, then you have to give them specific sick leave, and versus if they're outside, then you don't.
So you have to know exactly, is it where they live or where they work? Or
where they work, I believe. So we have specialists for that that know exactly which one that's supposed to be. And when we get into that gray area, then we usually have to research that. And when they change the laws, so they just changed the laws middle of last year. And so there's certain things that'll come into play, and we have to update the policies and make sure people are in compliant and things like that. So it can throw us off course too when we've got things we have to pay attention to. New Jersey is one that also has paid family leave. And, there's some that have requirements for retirement leave, or not leave, but retirement plans. So if you don't have a retirement plan already that's compliant with what's required, then there's offerings for the city or the state that you have to provide, or at least direct them to. So some states are starting to they look a little more European than they do, more US sides of things.
I was talking to my office manager today, and I was like, I think we're getting outnumbered by the virtual assistants and the staffing agency we use. And then she's like, yeah, we already are. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. But we've been sort of farming out a lot of our HR to a staffing agency. But I mean, this conversation alone starting to make me remember how all the details and how important it is to hire someone who can help you, or even if it's just like having a consultation every once in a while, or know that you're, because
Mhm.
it's gotten more complicated. Like we think it's easier by everyone being virtual, but it actually just adds a whole nother layer. And I mean,
And
in
a
my
lot of the laws are not designed for virtual workplaces. They did
right.
actually update the I-9, which was, thank goodness they did that finally, because now there's a way to check off if you have reviewed the documents virtually,
Mm,
versus if you actually physically saw them. Because before that, the regulation was you had to physically see them. And there was no real way to identify the documents unless you, so the person would have to go and have a witness see the documents and turn in an affidavit or some kind of notarized document. There wasn't real ways to, or you really just had to fudge the fact that you completed the I-9 properly. But now there's a specific checkbox saying that you'd use an alternative method to identify the documents. And a lot of the HRIS systems have already updated their systems. So if you're completing a 9-9 electronically in your HRIS systems, then that's already there for you too. So all of this technology has started to catch up with it. But there's a lot of, like, even just the other day, we were talking about how if you, for example, Illinois is changing their minimum wage. And when you change a minimum wage, you have to update your posters, and is updating, your posters in your OneDrive or SharePoint or somewhere where if you have, your virtual posters for everyone to see if that's good enough, versus the regulation really is that your posters are supposed to be displayed if you have a physical location, and all those posters have to be updated and current and things like that. So, kind of helping companies decide what kind of risks are they taking by having certain things virtual versus a physical office, and what should be updated when and how. And a lot of that comes down to just, those weird little compliance issues. Then, we end up a lot of times having to ask attorneys too, be like, but some laws are just too new. They don't know how to interpret them yet. And others just are older and virtual laws haven't been updated. So that really sucks
well,
too.
yeah, us lawyers are familiar with the laws not catching up to modern day. Like, but I think one of the biggest things with the pandemic was it helped get the work environment and the way law was practiced. It moved it up maybe a decade or two. So that was especially the way we interact with the government or courts and things like that. Well, we are running close to the end, and so now it's time to have the rapid questions. So everyone's like, okay, I need to hire for help. Oh my gosh, I can really screw this up. But thanks for walking through some of that. And like, I do want to share, like, I know that I learned the hard way with a lot of turnover initially because I didn't understand how to correctly hire, what I was looking for. I was a bad interviewer. I once heard, like, if you don't know what you're doing, you have a 50-50 chance of getting the right person. But then it's also not just getting the right person, it's also like engaging in them, growing with them, having opportunity. Because like really, I think people who have success tendencies, they want to see a pathway for growth, and they're going to want to know where they're going in the practice. And so having those opportunities well is clearly defined, and also having performance reviews and check-ins, I think a lot of those can help make a better work environment. And so I learned a lot of these things the hard way, and I feel like the second half of my practice has been in a better place. But it's also that 6 to 8, 10, the 6 to 10 space was hard for
Mhm.
me, because like after that I felt like I was always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like I'd always lose a group and then have to rebuild. And now I'm in this space where I'm building the middle management and growing them and developing their leadership. And so it's getting into a good place. But anyway, that's some of my feedback, but from what I've experienced. But let's go into rapid questions. So, what is your favorite board game?
I have a couple of them. I actually have a board game that I like to play, but it's not my favorite, which is a very weird thing. So I like Monopoly. I like playing Monopoly with people. If I'm going to go grab a board game, that's probably it. But for whatever reason, it's actually while I'm playing it, I remember why it's like such a nerve-wracking game. I think it also depends on who you're playing with. And if they start bartering with you and trying to negotiate for properties and things like that. But Monopoly is one that I played, I think, the most growing up.
What's the second one, though? You said two.
I would say card games would probably be the other one. So I get to travel a lot with my husband. We because of the way we have our businesses virtual, he's also a business owner. Together, we actually own 5 businesses altogether. But
Wow.
we usually travel 1 to 2 weeks a month internationally, and so a lot of times we'll like if we're on a cruise or a train or something like that, we usually have cards with us. So.
Oh, wow. Well, you should have told us more about the 5 businesses that we'll have to have. Um,
I mean, they're tech. I mean, one's a tech company, one's the capital firm that I own, and we've never taken capital. We've never grown. But everything has been homegrown. So we have our business structures in a way that it's kind of all owned that way. So they're kind of independently slash co-owned that way, and then we have, like you were talking about, having overseas workers and things like that. So we actually have a company that does all of that for us that we built ourselves. So rather than hire
oh,
one, we just created one. So that one is Griffin Cloud. And we have about 20 team members in the Philippines. We've got 6 developers in India. And we had some in Pakistan, but we ended up bringing that work into the Philippine team. So we kind of just, there's a technology we want, we usually just build our own. We usually just work with developers. So we
oh,
kind of just solved our own problems halfway through, like some of the things we needed. And then the other one is a plane. So we actually have a 8-passenger plane that's in a charter fleet.
oh, okay. Well, we should have a series of super entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs. Super, but I meant serial, but I guess I meant also super. That was maybe a slip of tongue. But we should probably have a whole series on that. And then we'll make a note to have you talk about that. That's interesting. But
Yeah.
so then I guess let's see what you say to this one. What is your superpower?
Honestly, like there's probably things that I would want to have. And as a power that I don't have, as much as we travel, I honestly wish I understood and spoke more languages. So there's things that I'm still learning. My husband's first language is Portuguese, and so he understands a lot of Latin-based languages. I'm trying to learn them. Just I feel really bad. I've been with my husband 20 years and I have never learned Portuguese, at least nothing like significant beyond pleasantries. So I'm trying to become more multilingual, just for the sake of traveling. I've picked up Spanish a little bit better. So we were just in northern Spain last week, and I was able to practice more of my Spanish. But I do like being able to actually get immersive in culture and I'm really open to learning how people really do live and function. And actually my dissertation was on the communication of between employees across a multinational company. And so I did a qualitative study of a company in Macedonia and Serbia. So being, I guess, kind of working in across different cultures and different religions and things like that has always been very fascinating to me. So that's one thing that I have kind of taken. I don't know if that's considered a superpower, but it's definitely something that I enjoy and want to kind of take a part of my own life and put it into my work life.
Well, we'll take it. And was it in the Basco or was it in what's the other place, the Gallego? Which part of northern Spain were you, or Catalonia, or where were you?
In Galicia,
Oh, okay. Did you
so
do the
like Northwest Spain.
Did you do the Camino de Santiago?
We drove it,
Oh,
but there was no way I would walk that. I do know people who have walked it. More power to them. No, we actually got our rental car in Porto and drove the majority of that roadway and stayed in several of
oh.
the cities where there are stops along the way. But no, I have no desire to walk that.
Well, I did the very minimum you need to say you did it. But there's different caminos, but it's like either 120 kilometers or 100. I don't know. It's something. I think it's like
Wow.
70 miles. But yeah, I did like 20 years ago. I was talking to my buddy. I was like, we need to go do it again. It was a lot of fun actually, like walking through cow fields and stuff. Okay, so what's a habit that makes you successful?
I I wish I had a good answer for this, and I wish I had something that was inspirational for people. Um, I think I don't have habits, which is really bad, I think, for being a business owner. It's not like I do the same thing every day or have some kind of routine that makes sense in any way, shape, or form. I change things constantly. I think honestly, more so what has gotten me to where I am is once I have goals, I reach them. So I think, and pretty much all lawyers would know that. I mean, getting through law school, or in my case, a doctoral program, being able to set goals, break them down into smaller pieces, and then reaching those goals has been probably what got me there. But that's not necessarily a habit.
Well, it's a healthy, successful way to accomplish what you want. So I think James Clear will give you a pass for other habits, but that's fine. No, I mean, you're doing something right. What would you say is a favorite book or podcast that you're like, oh my gosh, I love it. I have to share.
Um, I would say one of the books that I liked when I first became a manager was Eaters Eat Last.
Mm,
Um, and it really the title of the book really came from the military background where, leaders in the military literally eat last and everyone, kind of eats together and things like that.
mm,
And the higher ranking you are, the more you are like last in line. And it's not a set rule. It's just became something that they developed. And so it was always about taking care of the newer person in front of you.
mm,
And so that was something when I first became a manager, I took that very seriously and I did like a 6-month coaching course. I learned I didn't want to be a coach, but I did learn some skills from that were helpful. And then kind of started to read some of those books. And that one is one that's always stuck with me about the type of leadership that I wanted for myself and for my company. And, kind of making it so that other people have a place to thrive and grow and things like that. And so that's kind of when I've definitely done some things wrong in my company. We've definitely hurt some feelings, but we try to do right and try to learn and grow. So that would be the
oh,
book that
thanks.
I
I'll
recommended.
check it out. Yeah, that's great. I always learn something with those questions. That's basically selfishly I ask those, but hopefully somebody else gains something from me asking those questions. So Michelle, it's been great. How can people reach out to you, find you if they want to keep the conversation going and connect?
My website is probably the easiest. It's griffin-resources.com. All of my contact information is on there, goes directly to my cell phone and things like that. And then LinkedIn is usually pretty easy. Michelle Griffin, PhD. So usually I'm pretty Googleable.
Google, yeah, Michelle with two L's and two F's in the Griffin, right? That sounds good.
Yes.
Well, that's awesome. So we've talked a lot about the importance of having a fractional HR support and just all the different, um, just a lot of the scope that's needed to run a successful business. And if you're at a point that you can hire that help and just lean into that, it can be very beneficial. Unlike sort of what me, but just sort of learned from the hard way for a long time. But anyway, we have to learn it somehow. And I think that's the perennial question: when to hire and when to do it when to do it yourself and keep it in house. But it's great to know there's programs and companies out there like yours, Michelle, and I think we just going over some other points about like how to reduce turnover, the importance of exit strategy, how better to hire, and just a lot of the different things to be thinking about, especially with tax and employment law compliance, that can be a headache. But I appreciate your time today, and I know a lot of people learned from today's episode. So thanks, everyone. We have Power Up Your Practice available on Amazon. We have the Kindle version, and we also have a new community on School, SKOOL, Power Up Your Practice. So take a look at that, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Power Up Your Practice Law Practice Management podcast. I'm your host, Ruby Powers, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review, tell someone else about us, and we'd love to get this podcast shared with others to reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive content, tips, and updates straight to your inbox. And exciting news, our book, The Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with strategies, 25 chapters, to help you elevate your practice and achieve your goals. So join us next week as we dive into more advice and insight on law practice management. We'll see you next time.